All right, well, welcome everybody. Thanks for being here this afternoon. And for folks just trickling in and joining now, feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself with your name and affiliation. But Happy New Year. Here we are in 2022. I'm excited for another year together. And although it's kind of a crazy time COVID-wise right at this exact moment, maybe than any other time in the pandemic, I am hopeful that we'll be seeing this move from pandemic to endemic, and then just the silent hum in the back of our lives and that we can get back even more to normal. So what that means for us, at least, is getting together more in person and not using a chat box to say hi to everyone, but gathering over coffee and snacks and at round tables and all the old school ways we used to connect. And so just for fun, I have a couple of polls. We used this the last time we met virtually back in June. And Fiona's gonna throw this into the chat box as well. Go to this website and enter this code. And what you're gonna see is a fun couple of questions just for fun. And this should be launched already, so you should be able to get here. What's your favorite winter activity? You can also do this from your phone too if you find it too hard to or cluttery to open up another window. Oh, we got one for hiking, sledding, nice. Oh, a couple for hiking. I myself recently rediscovered my love of building snow people, although it's like really hard, harder than I remember as a child making a snowman with my daughter this past week.
Depends on what kind of snow you get.
I know. Well, the first day, not good. After we got the rain and ice, it was much better. A lot of
Who might tell you how to build snowman?
All right. As I don't know if more people are trickling in, but if you look in the chat, there's a link to this just silly / fun icebreaker poll. What's your favorite winter activity? You can, if you can't get to menti.com via the web or your phone, you can also just put it in the chat too. But seems that hiking's a hit, of course, with this crowd.
You should have a separate breakout for cross-country skiing.
I thought about that. Yeah, I know. To me, because I only cross-country ski, I figured that's real skiing, but it's not.
Okay.
Or snowshoeing.
Or snowshoeing.
Oh, yeah,
that's
right.
That's sort of hiking, right?
Clearly, I've not been doing too many of these activities. I had to ask my husband for what do we do in the winter.
Yeah, we forgot taking pictures of snowy owls. That's my favorite.
That's true. That's not on here either.
Sort of hiking too, right?
Yeah, throw any others in the chat. Well, it looks like hiking's coming out on top here, and then followed by skiing, snowboarding. And then there's one other one I have, and so stay tuned, stay in the Menti. 3 to 5 words. You can do this a couple of times if you want, but this will look like a word cloud. Just curious, interested, how you would like to connect with H2H this year. Collaborate. Great word to start us off. As we think about 2022 and our time together, and hopefully return to more normalcy. Nice. Well, we're going to talk about some events that we have going on, so that's right up there. Love it. Ways we can connect, get outdoors together, be in person. Yes. Working groups. Absolutely. network with each other. That's great. We'll save this. I can share this too, but feel free to, if you're still thinking, we'll give another minute. And just, I'll mention that when I was working with the steering committee and putting this agenda together, I know we wanted to continue to create space where we can connect and just really get inspired with each other. I mean, again, it continues to be this kind of insane time in the world that has brought challenges to our work, to our personal lives, to our health, and no doubt to how we connect as a partnership. And again, I'm hopeful that we already will see, we've got some things lined up for this year, but see how we'll be able to get back to a little bit more normality as we meet. We did get a chance to meet, some of you were there in October. We had a gorgeous day for an all-partner meeting in person, and it was awesome. It's a really great time. I loved seeing that part that we're really missing, which Beautiful. Is being able to network and just connect with each other, sit around a table and talk to one another and go on a hike together. And it was really special. So we are thinking that very soon, probably later in the summer, one, pandemic wise, we're hoping it'll be better. Two, weather will be nicer for gathering outdoors. And then hopefully we'll get there this summer. So let me just switch back. Thank you for participating in these fun polls. We have a simple agenda. This. Simple agenda today. We're going to catch up on some updates, what's happening, what's been happening, H2H. And we're going to also then hear, we have a speaker, Ed Faison, from a senior ecologist at Highstead, who's going to talk to us about lessons from long-term forest monitoring, forest growth, invasive species, and deer browsing. So I got a preview, very exciting and very interesting work and research he's been doing. So look forward to that. And then we're going to end with something kind of new. We've done stuff like this in the past at our meetings, but I'm really interested in helping partners identify some projects that they could use some help on and collaboration on, in whatever ways that might be. And so we have 3 partners who filled out a pitch form to present. And so they're going to kind of these lightning presentations, 5 minutes or so. They're going to share a project they're working on and what they need or could use from others in the region. And so you may have ideas for them to share. And so they're all very different parts of the region will be represented and 3 different organizations, 3 different projects. So very exciting stuff. So stay tuned for that because they could definitely use your feedback. And so without further ado, I'm going to kick it over. I know I do have them in an order, but depending on who's here, we can move it around. I invited the working group chairs just to offer any updates that they wanted. And so we have land protection. I don't know if Chris, are you?
Hey, Katie, thanks. I appreciate it.
Great.
Great to see so many people here. My name is Chris Aldrich. I'm with the Greenwich Land Trust, and I'm the semi-new chair of the Land Protection Working Group. The group has done some really great work in the past. I'm looking forward to continuing that work. We have a meeting coming up that I'm planning to schedule in February, and I'm kind of just using this as a time to see if I can drum up some people to join. We're going to be working off of our past efforts to better define and prioritize high priority parcels, develop a collaborative approach for partners to report information about land protection projects across the region, and also on the best way to inform partners about fundraising opportunities. I'm going to put my email address in the chat box, and if anybody is interested in joining in the conversation and contributing, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. And Chris, just if you schedule a meeting, throw it out in the listserv too for folks that aren't here and that might want to join as well once you have it scheduled.
Absolutely. Thanks, Katie. I just put my email in the text box.
Awesome. All right, municipal engagement. Dave, I think I saw you.
Look, I got 3 screens here and I'm trying to figure out which one the unmute button was on. So thanks everybody. We're still in the process. Well, I wouldn't say reinvigorated. There's a lot of interest out there amongst everybody. So I'm going to be sending out an email. I'm actually writing it now. And I'll shoot this out on the listserv too. And Chris, that's a great idea. I'm going to put my email address up in the chat for anybody that's interested in the municipal engagement group. Working with municipalities to encourage or promote better planning for conservation. So I was looking, I'm also at the same time, one of the screens in here has the base camp open. So I'm looking at some of the prior work that the group has done and how we can take some of those products to completion and work on some of the other items that we had wanted to work on or started working on in the past. And we'll also maybe schedule another meeting for this spring sometime. So with that, I reiterate Chris's statement that it's great to see a lot of people here on board and interested in what's going on, and we look forward to continuing collaborating.
Awesome, thanks, Dave. Landowner engagement. I think we're now calling it just engagement, and that's me only because I stepped in as interim chair to revive the group. And so we met 4 or 5 times this past year. And in that time, we were able to contribute to the conservation strategy, which we did talk about at our last meeting. We also did some prioritization of who we want to target in this outreach. When we say engagement, who are priorities. We want to reach probably several audiences, but narrowing in on a few priorities, and then why and how we might approach such engagement. And at our last meeting in December, there was real interest and focus on identifying projects and actions that this group can kind of dig into, and maybe even sponsor a webinar or program to invite folks on a particular topic to talk about what it is they're doing, because nothing inspires more than hearing about what people are doing in whatever topic area is of interest. And so that was really re-energizing, and I'm going to be following up with the group soon. I am going to step down this year as the interim chair and leave space for anyone interested in heading that up. And it could really look like whatever you want it to, or you have the ability to do. For me, it was really just organizing some meetings, gathering people, and like I said, this last meeting, there was a big focus on trying to identify some projects and inviting some folks to come and talk or share a program to just re-energize around an idea or a project. I'll have Fiona, if you want to throw my email address in the chat, if this is of interest or you want to know more, shoot me an email. Part of the reason I'm stepping down is to be coordinator and all the other hats I wear at Highstead. Aside, I will be on maternity leave come mid-March. So there'll be an inevitable gap in leadership. So I also just want to see if there's others are interested. If not right now, that's okay. I think once there's some action and projects happening, it will naturally reform. And so that's my update for engagement. Next is capacity building. Over to Jocko.
Thank you, Katie. Likewise, nice to see everybody here. Too bad we're not in person. Working Group 4 has put together some possibilities based on the response to a somewhat recent poll, which we could still use more participation in. So please, once you hear what we're doing and you have some additions, please let me know. But over the course of this year, we'd like to do four of the following type programs. Engaging municipalities. So Dave, if you have some ideas for us that we could do semi-early in the year, a speaker or something, even online would be great. Come June or so, a bird program out in the field. later on in the year, a fundraising program, and to finish up the year, a story map building program. So we're looking forward to doing some of that. I apologize, I haven't emailed any of the committee. We'll do so shortly, and likewise, we'll put my email in the chat. If people will reconfirm their willingness to join working group number 4, or anybody new, please let me know. Looking forward to getting together when I put that group back together. So any ideas, go to the listserv or to me for programs, because again, we could still use input. Thank you.
Awesome, thanks, Jocko. And if any of those topics sounded like something you might have expertise in, also let Jocko know as well. That's great, thank you. Anyone from Pollinator Pathway that wants to offer an update? I can't see everybody in the list here, but
yeah, I'll update everybody. Let me get organized here. Hold on a second. Hi, Donna Merrill here. I just am not sure if everybody's aware that the Pollinator Pathway, who has been really expanding by leaps and bounds, and we've taken our steering committee and converted them into a board of directors. This fall, we incorporated as a non-member nonprofit corporation, and we are just waiting for our paperwork back to become a 501c3. So all really very exciting. We'll be doing some strategic planning, and number-wise, we've been in 9 states for a while, but we're now closing in on the 300 town mark. So talk about municipal engagement. I think we're really there. A lot's going on, and you know, it's just a matter of keeping up with it all. So it all grew out of H2H and FCRCP. Never would have happened if we hadn't happened. So it's really worthwhile to, you know, take some initiative and run with stuff, and you never know what'll happen. So thank you.
thanks, Donna. Gosh, and seeing this picture with lush green vegetation feels very nice, soothing and inspiring in and of itself. Michael, you have a question?
I do. To the Pollinator Pathway people, do you have any rough guesstimate on amount of acreage you've affected, or you know, coverage in some fashion that you could, you know, some kind of metric like that you could share at all?
Actually, we don't have a metric like that. If you go onto our website, you can see maps. We're actually in the process of updating these maps of our towns that have joined. But basically what the idea of the Pollinator Pathway, since 86% of all land east of the Mississippi is private property, how do we connect our protected open spaces? How do we connect our town parks and land trust protected land by having private property begin to manage their land in a healthy way? So it's not really, it would just be impossible. We've got thousands of individual property owners now that have signed up to the Pollinator Pathway.
Right, but that would be an impressive amount of acreage, actually, where you could put it together. And I think that it would make a good case for the impact of this program in terms of actually enhancing. I mean, what you're really doing is enhancing existing open space through the participation in the program. So I think that would be,
That's
you know,
an
interesting concept. Yeah, to try to find a way, you know how big the properties are, the people who are involved, I would think, and you might have some idea from, I don't know exactly, I know how it works in Somers, but I don't know about elsewhere, you know, how much of a person's parcel they've devoted to the, planting natives and so on. I mean, obviously it would be a rough and ready guesstimate, but I do think it could have some impact, to attach some numbers to it.
It might be a little difficult because a lot of the municipal engagement part involves things like roadsides and median strips. People can be on the pathway if they have a window box full of flowers. So we'd have to drill down to see the bigger properties. And then of those, I don't know if we would have any way of actually judging the extent of what they've converted to pollinator gardens.
I want to offer, sorry, I see another hand raised, but I want to offer that I think this, and I'll plant a seed for you, Chris Aldridge, but this, I feel like there's a connection between what you all are doing in land protection group. So I think we could have a whole meeting on this. So yeah, okay. Not to cut it off, that's awesome. And I think that maybe that's something to talk about at that February meeting Chris mentioned, just entertained. So I see two other hands. Are these quick questions, Simon? We have a few other updates we got to get to.
No, I just quickly wanted to say that in my town, we have a GIS data map, and we have been putting on our map the properties that have signed up for pollinator pathways. So there is a very visual way of the town seeing how much part of our town, at least, is being committed. So I thought it would just be something I'd share with the group.
Right. Yeah, GIS is very powerful. And John, I see your hand too.
Yeah, just one quick point. I mean, certainly the area is important, but the stress, at least as I understand it, and as we do it in terms of pollinator pathway, is on connectivity. So it's more important to have something going on every couple of 100 yards throughout a town, throughout a county, or whatever, than it is necessarily to focus on having a large park or something like that, because that's the part of the scientific underpinning, is to maintain those pathways. And the pathways could be somebody's back porch, a small backyard, or it could be a complete no-mow zone along a river. But the key thing is not so much the area as the points, as the connectivity.
Yeah,
thank you, John. Thanks.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, the project has been so inspiring, and that you guys are just bounding even further is very exciting. So I look forward to hearing more about it as we move into a new year. A few other things before we get to our speaker. I've shared this in the listserv. If they're not already, they'll be up on our website. We have a bunch of in-person networking events. So we heard from partners and from the steering committee. I know it's COVID. Life is kind of weird lately, and we're not seeing each other, and we're in masks, and how close are we standing to each other? But the magic of getting together and networking in person has kind of been missing. That's not a surprise. And so we heard that loud and clear, and we've worked with some partners to put together a few events this spring, and one is TBD in terms of date later in the summer, where it won't be an all-partner meeting, but there'll be the time to do the connecting and stuff in person that we just kind of miss that magic when we're online and Zooming all day, plus an activity. So there's a hike in March at the Woodcock Nature Center, and a restoration project tour in May with the Westchester Land Trust. So stay tuned for more info. These groups will be putting stuff out in the listserv, how to register, and to remind you about all of these dates, if there's rain dates and things like that. But so stay tuned. And in addition to some of the programs that Jocko already mentioned, some of those will be in person as well. So, looking at our calendar, we have something almost monthly in the next year. So that's very exciting and different from the last 18, 20 months together. Oops, I see animation that got messed up here, but I wanted to mention we finally did receive our official grant agreement from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation that is bringing restoration grant funds to Norwalk, but there are some funds in there, particularly for the entire, or specifically for the entire partnership. and a few ways that that will benefit all the partners or those interested. It may not apply to everybody, but there'll be some small grants available. Later this fall, there'll be an RFP for urban restoration projects. If there are groups involved in urban restoration, there'll be some small grants. So stay tuned for more information on that application. Again, probably late August, September, there'll be application that will be out for planting, thinking of spring 2023. There'll be some urban conservation mapping aid to interested partners who have moved into that realm or are interested in that. So it's technical assistance. And then we'll be planning a community conservation workshop. And again, this is looking at spring 2023 so that we're hopefully fully in person. And a workshop or a series of workshops to identify and implement conservation strategies to create connectivity between sort of the rural, ex-urban and urban landscapes with a focus on community engagement and habitat restoration. So just wanted to mention those as that grant just finally came in. And a majority of that is going to do some needed restoration in downtown Norwalk, Connecticut. But there's these other pieces that will reach the rest of our partnership. A few grants that come to mind only because of current work and partnerships of other initiatives that I lead and co-lead as part of my work at Highstead that I wanted to mention. There are certainly a lot of grants out there. There are other NIFWIF grants, depending on projects that you're looking for. Again, from the pitches we'll hear later, some of those might be projects ripe for said NIFWIF grant. But these three are sort of some lower hanging fruit. There's some smaller grants. One is if you're interested in running an eBird workshop in your region, or if we want to run it as an RCP, if a lot of land trusts or groups are interested, but don't think they'll have a great turnout and we can kind of join forces, we can apply for a small grant to run that workshop together. And that will be coming out probably in the next month or so. I'll get it out in the listserv. If you don't know about Cornell's Land Trust Bird Conservation Initiative, you should. I think Fiona's going to put a link to this small grants program in the chat. There are small capacity grants of 5,000 and larger management restoration grants for, I think, up to 25,000. Applications are being accepted till March 1st, I believe. Yep, March 1st. And if you're interested, let me know. I work very closely with the program administrator or director and the person who makes decisions on these grants. So let me know. I know my wheels are kind of turning to see if there's a project that might fit within the RCP level, the H2H level, that a few groups might be interested in terms of bird restoration. So these both have a bird focus. And then I already mentioned this urban restoration grant RFP coming out this fall. So just stay tuned for that. I believe I put this out in the listserv a little while ago, but just wanted to remind folks that I was able to get some more web or GIS resources out onto our website. And so there's GIS mapping that was done back in 2018, identifying areas of highest conservation value. There's data and an online map that comes along with that. There are some partner and GIS sharing agreements that need to be signed to access that. But if you're interested and this would be helpful to the work you're doing in your organization, let me know and we'll get you connected with all of that information. There's also—
Can you go back to the last slide just for a second?
Oh, sure.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. The Norwalk Urban Conservation Tool and Guide is also online, and you don't need any special permissions, but it's an online web map, and then there's a guide to help other urban centers, cities interested in doing such type of conservation planning. We'll likely be updating this tool over the next couple of years as part of this NIFWIF grant that we got as well. But I want to mention it's online. We've made a few updates on the website, so you can check that out there. And Fiona can put this link into our chat. Okay, so great. We are on time for, oh, one more little update. Sorry, Ed, I keep putting you on and off there. I already mentioned this, actually 2 little updates. Our family is growing, and so I'll be on maternity leave sometime mid-March through the end of June. So there is going to be, as you've already heard, a bunch of different events that you'll get to tap into. And Fiona Lunt, our conservation associate, who's on the call, Fiona, you can, if your camera's not on, just say hi, will be with the steering committee helping to manage some communications and helping not skip a beat in the few months they'll be out on leave. But I wanted to mention that if you're like, where did Katie go? So that's where I'll be. And then we have an opportunity possibly, where are my polls? Okay, we have an opportunity to, as a partnership, receive training in diversity, equity, and inclusion within the context of conservation. And these sessions would be led by professional trainers, DEI for short, diversity, equity, and inclusion trainers, and require the commitment of partners to take part in the full series. It might be 4 or 5 meetings or workshops throughout, I think, the course of a year. That's about what I know right now from some early conversations that I've been having with partners. But I'm going to launch a quick poll that you'll see pop up on your screen. And let me know, just kind of taking the temperature here, if that's something you'd be interested in participating in. I know I haven't given you a lot of information, but it's kind of still baking, percolating. I'll just give that a couple minutes here. All right, if you've all had a chance to trickling in, but we got about, let me just jot this down. 6:13, great. Okay, thank you. I guess I can share results, so because you can't see, this is the response so far, so. Stay tuned. Definitely would want to give you a lot more information and even gather more myself. I just figure with the captive audience, I would ask you. All right. So I'm going to turn it over to our speaker for today. Oops. Click on the next slide. There we go. It's a pleasure to welcome Ed Faison, Senior Ecologist at the Highstead Foundation, where he has worked since 2006. Ed's work focuses on long-term forest change, deer-forest interactions, the effects of land protection on forests, and natural climate solutions. His work has been published in a variety of scientific and popular journals, including Ecology, Conservation Letters, CT Woodlands, and Forest Ecology and Management. And he's here to share a bit about his research at Highstead and I think just at Highstead, possibly Harvard Forest as well. And I got to
just Highstead.
Just Highstead, great. So right in the heart of our region. And yeah, I'm going to turn it over to you. So let me stop sharing.
Am I ready to share? Okay.
You're ready, yep.
Have I shared the right screen? Or have I shared my notes?
You're all good.
Okay. Now I just want to. Okay. Well, thank you, Katie. And I am happy to be able to share some of the results from our monitoring program over the past 15 to 20 years at Highstead with all of you. And I just want to say this talk will be pretty data and graph heavy, so I apologize in advance for that, but it kind of goes with the territory on monitoring. And so I'll do my best to make it as accessible as possible as we go along. And just a note about terminology before I start. By long-term monitoring, I mean projects that are at least 10 years old. And I'll also be using the term exotic and invasive somewhat interchangeably in this talk, with invasive meaning a particularly abundant exotic species. So just a little background on the rationale for long-term monitoring. That, you know, there are many valuable benefits to monitoring, and you all are undoubtedly familiar with many, if not all of these reasons. And, you know, they include things like identifying long-term trends, including my personal favorite, the ecological surprise, which inevitably occurs in almost every monitoring project that I have worked on. Tracking the spread of new species, including exotics, is another important role. And monitoring can also address specific questions related to a forest disturbance like deer browsing, or can be conducted in response to specific management actions to gauge the success of that particular management effort. So I'm going to discuss what we've learned from two of our core projects at Highstead. And the first is our long-term forest plots. And these plots are an example of basic monitoring. And basic monitoring involves collecting systematic measurements over time, but without any manipulations or experimental treatments. So this approach can identify patterns of change, but it's limited in its ability to detect what's causing those patterns. And then the second project is our deer exclosure project, which is an example of question-driven monitoring. And question-driven monitoring typically involves manipulating a variable of interest, in this case deer, by fencing a portion of the forest to examine the effect of deer on the ecosystem. It could also take advantage of natural variation and disturbance in the landscape to study its ecological effect. Okay, so let's start with Highstead's long-term forest monitoring plots, which were established in a 1-acre grid on the property in 2004 for the purpose of documenting and understanding forest change over time in a suburban forest landscape. And each of these yellow squares represents a 20 by 20 meter plot. And we have returned to these plots every 5 to 6 years to remeasure the vegetation. So you can see the sampling dates here, or the sampling years, I should say. And the methods include identifying and measuring the diameter of all the trees above 1 inch in diameter in the plots, both alive and dead. Compiling a species list of all shrubs, herbs, and small trees, and estimating the percentage of the plot that each species covers. Counting tree saplings in a smaller subplot. And then finally, measuring the amount of large pieces of down wood on the forest floor. Okay, so what have we learned over the past 17 years? And I'll start with this graph on shrubs. And this graph shows only plots from the maple forest, which is here on the east side of the property. And we have year on the x-axis and plant abundance in percent cover on the y-axis. And we see that in 2004, the total native shrub cover, the green bar, was greater by a little bit than the exotic shrub cover. But over time, this is increasingly shifted to exotic dominated. And this is mostly multiflora rose and Japanese barberry, with lesser amounts of these other 3 species listed here. Interestingly, native shrub abundance has stayed largely unchanged and has actually increased slightly since 2004. So, you know, one of the things from this graph is that the explosive rise in invasives is generally not a zero-sum game, and that they're not necessarily crowding out the native shrubs and causing them to decline at the same time. Now, over in the oak forest, which are all of these plots on the west side of the property, west of the pond, the native shrub cover continues to dominate. And it initially declined from 2004 to 2009, and then increased again, as you can see, from 2009 to 2021. And this was probably related to the increase in storm damage from tropical storms Irene and Sandy and the October blizzard that I'm sure many of you remembered, which knocked down trees and allowed more light to reach the forest floor. But notice that the exotic shrubs, the orange line, have essentially remained at zero over time, despite increasing dramatically in the adjacent maple forest. And this shows that invasive plants are actually quite particular about where they colonize and where they are able to expand. And when you overlay the contemporary abundance of Japanese barberry from our plots in the Highstead forest on a 1934 aerial photo, which is pictured here, you can see that barberry is limited to areas that were once cleared as open field. And you can see the open field, these smooth textured areas, but remain mostly absent in the oak forest that remained forested in 1934. So this sort of dark textured area denoting forest. And the other invasive plants would look quite similar in their distribution if we were to plot them on this map. So land use history is playing an important role in invasive distribution. Of course, soil moisture and nutrients also play a role in the distribution, and both of these characteristics are higher in the maple forest. And proximity to seed source will also play a role too, and which is likely why you see some of the barberry here on the edge closer to residential houses in the oak forest. Okay, so we've looked at shrubs. Now let's take a look at the herbaceous plants and return to the maple forest here east of the pond. And here we see the steep decline of one invasive, garlic mustard, the orange bar, which was the dominant herb species in 2004, and then the dramatic rise of Japanese stokegrass, which first appeared in our 2009 sample. And garlic mustard's trajectory is an example of an ecological surprise, at least it was to me. None of us predicted that garlic mustard would decline because the literature suggested that it was pretty much unstoppable in invading forests because of its shade tolerance and other reasons. These pictures on the right are photo points, which are pictures taken of the plots from the same place every 5 years. And you can see how stiltgrass started with these patchy islands and then just took advantage of all this bare ground and filled in the plot by 2015. Now, interestingly, as stiltgrass has risen, the dominant native herb in the maple forest, sedge, combined all sedge species, the gray bars, continue to increase in abundance over time. So again, species invasions are often not zero-sum games. The rise in stiltgrass and sedge is likely due to the fact that native and exotic plants with similar growth forms often respond to the same environmental gradients of soil moisture, soil nutrients, and light, as well as disturbances such as deer browsing. Okay, so let's turn now to the tree layer, and the major story here, not surprisingly, is ash and the emerald ash borer, as I'm sure is true for many of you in the areas that you work in. And we see an almost 100% mortality of ash from 2015 to 2021 after the arrival of emerald ash borer in 2016. Now, one of the valuable aspects of long-term monitoring is that it can provide a broader perspective of a shorter-term trend. So when we look back to 2004, we actually see that the decline of ash had begun 5 to 6 years earlier, before the emerald ash borer arrived to Highstead. And this was from the effects of the native ash yellows fungus. So EAB exacerbated and sped up a trajectory that was already in place. And with the loss of ash in the maple forest, a new species has replaced ash as the second most abundant tree in that forest, and that's tulip poplar. So what we have traditionally called the maple forest or the maple ash forest at Highstead must really now be renamed the maple tulip forest. And with the sudden and almost complete loss of ash, along with those big storms in 2011, 2012, let's look at overall forest growth here. And basal area is the unit of growth. And this is the cross-sectional area of the trees, which is calculated from our diameter measurements. And for Highstead's forest as a whole, all of the plots, we see that forest growth initially increased from 2004 to 2009 and then declined slightly from 2009 to 2021. And this downward trend over the past 10 years becomes even more prominent when we just look at growth in the maple forest, where ash was growing, much steeper decline. And with the decline in live tree growth, we have seen a corresponding, not surprisingly, a corresponding rise in dead standing trees, as well as large down wood or coarse woody debris. And a rise in dead trees and down wood is actually quite characteristic of unmanaged forests as they age and are exposed to periodic disturbances from wind and insects in the eastern and northeastern US, although this process has been particularly rapid at Highstead. Both of these forest characteristics provide considerable benefits, though no longer sequestering additional carbon, standing dead trees and coarse woody debris continue to store existing carbon, often for decades as they slowly decompose. And dead trees and down wood also provide nesting and denning sites and food source for a variety of wildlife, like woodpeckers and flying squirrels and reptiles and amphibians, to name a few. And downwood also replenishes nutrients and carbon to the soil and serves as germination sites for new tree seedlings. Okay, so with the decline in forest growth, how has that impacted overall forest carbon storage? And you can see that the green portion of the bars, which refers to live tree carbon, has basically plateaued overall and declined sharply in the maple forest where ash was growing. But when you include the stored carbon and coarse woody debris and dead trees, the brown and black bars respectively, the total above ground carbon has continued to rise in the forest as a whole and even in the heavily disturbed maple forest. So carbon storage is pretty resilient, even in the face of heavy windstorms and insect outbreaks. Just more of the carbon gets converted from living tree biomass to dead and down wood. And we've also observed a sharp increase in tree regeneration over time, the majority of which are ash and tulip, as the mature tree mortality is increased. So this graph shows dead tree basal area, the black bars, and units over here on the left, and tree saplings, the orange line, and units on the right axis. And we only began collecting data on tree saplings in 2009, which is why the data starts there rather than in 2004. And this result is not terribly surprising because once canopy gaps open up in a forest and allow a lot more light, forests are remarkably resilient at regenerating, even in the face of deer and invasive plants. Okay, so I'm going to transition now to the second monitoring project that I wanted to discuss today, and this is Highstead's long-term deer exposure experiment in the maple forest. And again, this is an example of question-driven monitoring in which we manipulated deer abundance to understand how this herbivore is changing the forest understory. So the fence was built in 1998 around an acre of forest, and we compared the vegetation protected from deer browsing and trampling in two locations inside the fence to paired areas exposed to browsing outside. And we do this by using small 1 square meter quadrants pictured here and estimate the abundance of all shrubs, young trees, and herbaceous species. And we also compile total species lists for larger 400 square meter plots. And we began this intensive sampling in 2013, 15 years after the fence was built, and sampled the plots again in 2018 at the 20-year mark. And what have we found? Well, as this picture on the one from the previous slide suggests, Japanese stiltgrass has become far more abundant outside the fence in the presence of deer than inside, where it persists at very low levels under this dense shrub layer. Japanese barberry has also increased much more in the presence of deer outside the fence. And this is, you know, for both of these plants, this is in large part because deer do not eat them, thus giving them these already very competitive plants an added advantage over other species that are being browsed. But it turns out that this is only half the story. And the other half is that deer consume other invasive shrubs like multiflora rose and burning bush quite heavily. And these species actually grow much better inside the fence, protected from deer. And interestingly, native herbivores in the US actually consume most exotic plants and on average are more likely to suppress exotics than promote them. But this is clearly not always the case, as we see with stiltgrass and barberry. And we can see that exotic shrub cover was much more abundant in the unfenced areas in 2013. And this is all invasive exotic shrub cover combines all of those species that I showed in the previous slide, grouped into one. But as rose and burning bush have really proliferated inside the fence, the abundance has converged between the fenced and unfenced areas over time. So it's going to be really interesting to see what this pattern looks like in 2023. Will these lines cross? It's really hard to say. And as for native shrub cover, not surprisingly, it has consistently been more abundant inside the fence, protected from deer, and that difference has only grown over time. Okay, so let's look at deer impacts on plant diversity. The number of shrub and tree species have consistently been higher inside the fence. So this is number of species, whereas I just showed the actual cover or abundance of the plants on the last slide. Whereas herbaceous plants have been more species rich in the unfenced areas, although the treatments appear to be starting to converge. And you know, why would herbs be more diverse in the unfenced areas if deer eat them? And well, if you look at these pictures on the right side over here, the fence plots are on the far right with their more developed shrub layers. And they tend to be more densely shaded, which makes them less hospitable to many herbaceous plants than the more open browsed areas where there is more light. And in fact, I just came across a recent paper on the impacts of native elk and deer browsing in an old growth forest in Olympic National Park out in Washington, in which, like our site here, the fenced areas protected from browsing became very densely shaded over time and resulted in a loss of 46 to 74 herbaceous species over 36 years. So shade can be just as much an enemy to plant diversity as deer browsing in many cases. Okay, so this is a final set of graphs, and then I will wrap this up. Here are deer impacts on total exotic and native species diversity. And we see here that the total number of exotic species is greater inside the fence. So again, this speaks to the browsing pressure by native herbivores on exotic plants that I spoke of earlier. Whereas the number of native species has been higher in the unfenced areas exposed to deer, although we see the lines very much converging in 2018. So again, it will be interesting to see what this pattern looks like in 2023. Okay, so that's it for the graphs. And so I'll just sum things up here. And in the long-term forest plots that I started with, most invasive have risen. One notable one being garlic mustard has declined. Canopy ash trees have been all but eliminated by emerald ash borer, while young ash and other saplings are regenerating quite vigorously in the newly formed gaps. Forest growth has declined in the past 10 years, but total above ground carbon storage has continued to rise. In the deer exposures, deer have had dramatic effects that are best described as complex and contrasting depending on the variables measured. Deer have promoted some invasives and reduced others, reduced native woody plant cover, increased native and herbaceous plant diversity, and reduced exotic species diversity. So if anybody is interested in starting your own monitoring program, we have an online manual that goes step by step through the process of choosing a study to setting up the plots and collecting the data. And this is really geared towards the first project that I talked about, the long-term forest plots, as opposed to the deer exclosure. And we have an online database connected with this project that is maintained by the Harvard Forest, in which you can enter your data and gain access to some basic graphing tools, as well as access to other data sets that people have entered in the region. So if you're interested in starting a monitoring project, I'm happy to discuss that with anybody, and we can put my email in the chat at some point. So thanks very much for listening, and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Ed. That's awesome. We can all kind of clap or use your emojis. That was really awesome, and clearly years of study. There are a couple questions in the chat already. I can read them. There's one, I can scroll back up here. Do you think stilt grass is pushing out the garlic mustard? If you had planted sedge plugs after removal of garlic mustard, do you think the sedge would have kept out the stilt grass?
So yeah, I definitely had that question as well, whether stilt grass was responsible for the garlic mustard decline. When I run sort of correlations of the abundance of both by, in the individual plots, I have not found any relationship. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, and it doesn't mean that stilt grass isn't having an effect. I just haven't detected it. So I guess the answer is I'm not really sure. I will say that other long-term monitoring projects in the Northeast have also seen this trend. Burnt Blossie up at Cornell has a number of long-term monitoring projects, and they have seen a fairly widespread decline of garlic mustard as well. I wasn't aware of it until I, became aware of the trend at Highstead. And I'm not sure that, all of those forests, have stilt grass. So it may be, bigger than the stilt grass. In terms of planting the sedge, boy, it's a good question. I think, I think you're right in the sense that stilt grass very much took advantage of bare ground in the Highstead forest, and years of herbivory has contributed to that. I think one of the really limiting factors for stilt grass is a dense tall shrub layer, and I think that's one of the reasons that it has had so much trouble invading the deer exclosure, because of the dense tall shrub layer. There's also a seed dispersal issue, because deer are not sort of bringing it into the exclosure, but there's other ways that stilt grass could get in there. So, I think I would attribute it a little bit more to the shrubs, but, I think with a denser herb layer, that could have helped as well.
There's a couple other questions, and we may be able to get to a couple of them, but we have a couple other presentations. But Louise is asking, I see your hand, Michael. After this question, I'll turn it to you. But what is it about stilt grass that makes it unappealing to deer? Do we know?
That got answered by Jordy.
Oh, it did. Okay, great.
Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't see it in the chat. Michael, you have a question, and then there's another one in the chat here.
Yeah, I was very interested in that. Is there? I'd love to be able to borrow some of those slides or some of those results sometimes to share with people when I get questions about the impact of the invasives and so forth, and what their long-term prospects are in the forest. I did have a more specific question, though. I was very surprised by the what you said about the decline of herbaceous species in the areas that were protected with a fence, as I recall. I was thinking about it, and I was wondering, the exclosures keep the deer out entirely, which is also not really a natural situation.
Right.
so I was wondering if there would, the one question which, has come up before and I've thought about and never had really an answer to is, what is the optimal level of deer? I mean, I know we sometimes throw numbers out, but I'm not sure what the science is behind them. An optimal level of deer in terms of forest growth, forest regeneration, forest diversity. Because it seems to me that, you might find that there was greater herbaceous growth if you had a bit of deer browsing, but not as much as we currently have given the numbers and so forth.
Yes, and I think it's a good question, and I think it does get down, like many of these questions, to what one's objectives are for a particular forest, because I'm sort of the philosophy that there is no sort of right or correct forest structure or composition out there. A lot of people have different opinions. So I'm sort of more of what you would hope to see the most of, because as you say, if you completely eliminate deer, you're gonna get the highest density possible vegetation, but it can have detrimental effects on the herb layer. So for example, one study that looked at deer densities of 4 to 7 per square kilometer, which is, God, what is that? And somebody convert that to per square mile. I work in metric, but
that's like 5, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe it's 6 to 11 or whatever, but right. Go yeah. Ahead. So this was a study done in Pennsylvania, and they found by Royo and Carson and others, and they found that deer browsing combined with canopy disturbance increased the herbaceous layer by browsing the tall woody plants, such as the pin cherry regenerating. And so they found that to be sort of an optimal level of deer browsing to promote the herbaceous diversity without overwhelming it by herbivory. That's 4 to 7 per square kilometer. Mm-hmm. So that's one sort of example. In terms of tree regeneration, a lot of studies, again, from Pennsylvania have found that 8 deer per square kilometer, which is that 11 to 12 is often kind of a threshold beyond which regeneration gets more tricky. But I'll say that with the caveat of, once you open up the canopy, that's in a closed forest. Once you open up the canopy, the deer are just almost unable to prevent regeneration. They can still affect species composition, but the forest can very much regenerate.
I see that there are a few other questions. John, I see your hand, but we have 3 partners who are going to make a project pitch and are looking for your feedback. So I need to move on so that we have time for each of their presentations. So what I'll ask Ed, first, John, if you can put your question in the chat, and Ed, if you can hang on a few minutes and help address these questions, just sort of say whoever's name it is, Liz, and answer her question. I think there's a few behind hers there that
I'm a slow typer, so
that's okay. But thank you again. This was just totally awesome and clearly thought-provoking and interesting with all of these questions that are popping up. So sorry to crack the whip there, but I want to turn it over, and let me just throw this up here. So thanks again.
Yeah.
So I had put a call out to see, as we go into a new year, projects that partners are working on. We're a collaboration. How can we help each other? Nothing's too small, too big. Let's dream and see if we can't help each other out. And so this is our lineup of speakers. Patrick, I'll turn it over to you in a minute. And then as an audience, just be thinking about if you have ideas or suggestions or partners. It could be yourself, resources, funding ideas. I mean, I know a lot of it comes down to money to offer that you might be able to do in chat. If something comes up, throw it in the chat. Is it something aligning with what you're already doing? or interested in learning more about. Or maybe you have your own project and didn't get a chance to pitch it, or isn't fully thought out or articulated, or you want some support with, please just reach out to me. So without further ado, Patrick, do you want to need to share your screen?
No, I don't need to share my screen. I do need to, hold on, exit the full screen mode so I can see my notes. But this is a project that has been many years in the brewing, if you will, but we haven't really fleshed it out with all of the partners just yet. Basically, the idea is to focus on the Mill River and Sasko Creek Brook watersheds in the Fairfield region. Part of the reasoning for choosing these watersheds is because we have a presence in both of these watersheds. We have a preserve in the headwaters of the Sasko Creek and also towards the mouth of it. One of our partners, the Aspetuck Land Trust, also has a lot of land in the Sasko watershed. And then in the Mill watershed, there are a lot of partners that we feel we could work together with, including both the towns of Westport and Fairfield, as well as groups like water companies that we haven't quite reached out to yet. But we've started talking about this to some of our local partners who are interested in this idea. But we've already built an amazing foundation for this with our work on habitat restoration and enhancement along Sasko Brook in particular. We started with restoration efforts at our Smith-Richardson Preserve in Westport, and we got some funding from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and created some amazing migratory stopover habitat on this approximately 100-acre sanctuary on the lower reaches of the Sasko. What then we discovered is that there are a lot of species of high conservation concern found in these particular watersheds, and for which these watersheds are quite important. And these are wildlife resources at a global scale. Of course, things like wood thrush are globally near threatened, fairly widespread in Connecticut, but we do have a lot of wood thrush habitat in this watershed. But it's also important for brook trout, for spotted turtle, which is actually a globally endangered species, as is American eel. And it's particularly important for American eels, which have a very interesting sort of reverse catadromous fish type migration, where they go out to the Sargasso Sea to breed and then come up to our estuaries to spend their teen years and formative years, if you will. So the idea is to get a bunch of partners together to further these already successful conservation efforts. We're actually working on a project in the Sasko headwaters right now, which is focusing on particularly spotted turtle and American eel. We got some funding from NIFWIF there. But our idea is, that if we can sort of expand our work and work together with, partners such as local land trusts, such as the local towns, such as the local pollinator pathways committees, we can do some demonstration projects. If the town is interested, if the land trust is interested, we can do demonstration projects on any one of our 3 sanctuaries in the watershed. We could work with some big corporations that own large amounts of lands in the Mill River watershed. And additionally, we could start applying some of the geospatial information we have about the state of Connecticut and areas of importance, and sort of identify key landowners to work with, both municipalities and say Sacred Heart University or Fairfield University, but also key private landowners within these watersheds. And if we could get if we could find a way to do habitat assessments on these properties, perhaps including a forester, perhaps in conjunction with Dave Beers and the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection Forestry Division, but to go out and visit these private and municipal and land trust properties, do an assessment, and maybe even find some seed money to start implementing these changes that would benefit the watershed and the forests of this highly suburbanized region. We could also get a lot of landowners, we think, that would be partners and would be able to offer a collaborative match in this process. We may go to a large private landowner and do an assessment, and they may agree, yes, I'll do X amount of work on my property, improving pollinator habitat or whatever. So the idea mainly would be to be able to do assessments, to be able to seed some some actual on the ground work on private lands to pick a few public properties to create, pollinator / watershed riparian health demonstration areas, and then have all of the local partners working as a resource with landowners, municipalities, et cetera, to try and improve these watersheds in a really highly coordinated fashion. And with all the additional monies that is coming down the pike from Long Island Sound Conservation, we feel there'll be probably a lot of opportunities for further implementation of this work if we can lay the groundwork of identifying the key partners and doing the assessments and having some at least seed projects.
Well, that's Patrick, you must have practiced. That was exactly 5 minutes.
Oh, I didn't actually, but that was just luck.
Perfect. So now we have 5 minutes. I'm keeping track with a little timer here. And so I know I sent you some ideas off the top of my head, but I'd love to hear what others are thinking. I heard pollinator pathway in there. I heard, collaborating on match, grants. I mentioned a couple grants today that might be of service, but either unmute and share, throw it in the chat if that's easier.
Katie, this is Louise. I know Donna and other people are on from Pollinator Pathway, but that's an obvious. We'd be totally happy to work together on that. And what we have is, lots of private homeowners. And so if you had a target area that you were looking at, we could look at our database of members and town organizers and work with you on outreach that way.
Awesome, thank you. One thing, speaking of private landowners, one of the ideas that I've been kicking around with some others is there a way for private landowners to receive some sort of tax benefit by implementing these agreements? And obviously it's a tricky legal question. We'd probably have to talk to Amy Patterson about that, and Eric and Hammerling and others who are involved in the law side of things. But would there be a way to implement a conservation easement where they have to manage their property in a certain way for a certain number of years, and then have that money be able to be matched and or leverage for additional projects and tax deductible for the homeowners?
Yeah, incentives. That's a great idea.
Yeah, I really like that. I'm wondering at the municipal level if anyone knows of similar models like that. I mean,
yeah, I wonder if it could be an ordinance or something.
Right.
Yeah, to start out locally.
I mean, it may rise to the level of requiring IRS, involvement, in which case Amy could be very, very, very helpful to us because she has so many connections with the National Land Trust people. But that's just sort of a pie in the sky hope that I have, because some of the work we've done in the past, there have been significant private landowner investments in their properties, and obviously incentives would always be great.
From this is Elise Arno, from a municipal perspective, where comp plans put in conservation overlay zones, some of this buffer protection, pollinator planting, that sort of thing could be written into some of those instruments.
Great idea.
And there may be some crossover with some of the federal programs through USDA, some of the conservation reserve programs, something like that. They're good models for easements out there. They're typically at a big scale, but they're right. Looking to grow those programs, and in doing so, get them down to the smaller local level as well to get more implemented.
And this is for a region full of land trusts. That small grants program up to $25,000 for restoration projects on the ground, Patrick. I don't know if you've applied in the past because there's this bird aspect to the Cornell Land Trust grant. You have to partner, or the applicant has to be a land trust. But you asked about funding for assessments on the ground.
Right. Yeah, we might. We work with several land trusts in different parts of the state, so that could definitely come in handy in one of those areas. We're very close with Wyndham and Middlesex, and of course Aspetuck and and well, almost all of them.
Mama. Mama.
Other ideas? We have about 45 seconds here. Not to say, Patrick, if you want to put your email or other contact, that might be helpful for folks as you're sort of woken in the middle of the night with a brilliant idea that could help Patrick and help yourself. You can email him.
Yeah, or want to partner with us. You know, I think I'm a strong believer in the power of partnerships. So, you know, the more the merrier. And I think there's a lot of funding coming down the pike from on sound appropriations and from the infrastructure bill. So we as a group need to be ready to pounce.
That's time. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Really great suggestions. Thank you, Patrick.
All right. Is it all right if I leave now? I do have another board meeting to attend. So
no worries, I'm sure.
Okay.
Yes, thanks.
Thank you all
so much. I'm going to turn it over to Simon. Let me make sure I know how to Skolnick, Bedford Conservation Board. So I'm going to set my timer. And Simon, if you need me to share a screen or if you want to, I can.
I would like to share the screen.
Okay, great.
Okay. So my name, I'd like to introduce myself first. My name is Simon Skolnick. I just retired from being chair of the Town of Bedford Conservation Board in the end of last year after 25 years. I'm also the president of the New York State Association of Conservation Commissions. And I'm representing the town of Bedford in this particular pitch to you guys. And I guess if I could share my screen, it would be easier. Let's see. Great. Okay. So clear what this is, the concept of this, I guess, pitch to you or pitch for ideas is that we've already set ourselves up because the town of Bedford received a grant in October of 2021 to map out connecting wildlife corridors between significant habitats. We completed in 2015 a map, which you can see, I believe you can see the map right now, and I'll apologize to my two neighboring towns in a second. But that map in the center is Bedford, and it just to give you some idea, 684 runs down here, and this is the Sawmill River Parkway. This is Mount Kisco. So if you're familiar with Northern Westchester, we're pretty much in the center of it. So we received the grant from New York State DEC last year to map our wildlife corridors that connect our significant habitats. And that would be great just as it is, but the grant also goes further and is asking us to produce a ordinance to protect these corridors. And so we would be doing an overlay zone after we finally do the mapping that would be would be legally mapped, so that someone if you zoomed into your tax parcel, you would see a line on your tax parcel that shows that on one side of it, you're within the overlay zone. On the other side of it, you're out of it. So we don't have a clear, at this point, any clear understanding of what the ordinance will say. It could be simply just making it into a critical environmental area, which is the lowest level, or it could be making it into an extremely a prohibitive area. If it's a subdivision, you can't put houses in the overlay zone. You'd have to cluster them. And so for ourselves, we're all set. Bedford's fine. But the pitch I'm making to you is that, hey, you know, this is a wonderful idea. And I actually approached two other towns, and this is where I will apologize to Somers and Pound Ridge. We didn't have this in our application, so I sort of rushed and put this together. But the reason we contacted Pound Ridge, which is here, and Somers, which is here, is that they already did a similar map as we did, and used the same organization, Hudsonia. So I included in my application that I included these maps in my application, saying, well, the next step would be let's expand Bedford's wildlife corridors and connect them up into Somers and Pound Ridge. And I've had discussions with those two towns. And by the way, representatives from those two towns are here tonight or this afternoon, and they can comment. So the idea is a fascinating idea, because once you identify corridors and put an overlay zone protecting them, that's open space you're protecting. And if you can continue that, you are not only protecting open space, you are actually protecting wildlife movement. We're finding in Bedford now that people are fencing their property lines, and this would be one way of preventing that from happening, keeping open areas. And as far as I know, I don't know of, and because I have a statewide position, I don't know of any other municipality in New York State that has actually done that, has actually created an ordinance protecting wildlife corridors. So even though it was part of the application, I don't believe anyone's ever done it. So we're sort of excited about this. It's a 2-year project. And so the next step is that we'd like to get other areas. I mean, the town of Lewisboro is above us. The village of Mount Kisco is here. We have 2 other towns here. As a matter of fact, I met recently with Mount Kisco and one of those other towns just about creating trail connections, but we didn't talk about wildlife connections. So that's really what I'm presenting to to your group today is basically, I think we have something here that has tremendous expandability. I mean, Connecticut is just right over here. So moving into Connecticut would be no problem for this. And I think this could be
That's 5 minutes, Simon, just to let you know.
I'm done.
In terms of if maybe reiterating what would be helpful from folks.
What would be helpful would be finding grants to continue the grants that we Hello. But that would be basically is how do we go about getting grants so that other towns can do the same thing that Bedford's doing.
Can I jump in for a sec? Yeah, because I worked with Simon a little bit on this, and so he didn't steal Somers completely without permission. And
I have to apologize. Somers is like tilted. I think there was an earthquake. I think it's bigger than it is. Pound Ridge I made bigger. It's smaller, but I mean this was put together cutting and pasting. So I apologize.
Yeah, and no worries. I just wanted to add on to Simon's pitch. I think what we are interested in. I mean, our municipality has always been interested in expanding this kind of regional investigation of how to protect open space, significant open space. But I think what we're looking for is interest in surrounding areas. I mean, ultimately, I think this could be a region-wide effort to try to develop model ordinances and implement them in the various municipalities that might be interested in this. And you know, we have these various, you know, we have these maps that Simon's showed. We also have other areas that have been identified due to previous projects. There's what's known as the Eastern Biotic Corridor. There's the Croton to Highlands corridor. All of these were identified in previous projects. And essentially what we want to do is show, we believe that the landscape is permeable and we want to protect that permeability to the degree we can. Wildlife corridors look like a promising way to do it. So I think we're interested in whether others are also interested in partnering on a project of this nature.
I just want to step in too, because I've spoken to Michael and Simon about this. One of the things that I want to reiterate in our pitch is that we're thinking that the 3 towns, this could be a model that could scale up. So rather, I think than originally we were not thinking spreading this from H2H, but the 3 towns could be a model that other groups could use. So I just wanted to add that in there.
I know that, hi, Ellen and Simon, this is Elise. And I know Karen Simons is on here and folks from Westchester Land Trust are on here. We've been looking at this. In fact, in Pound Ridge, we are using our Open Space Acquisition Committee and using the Hudson Valley Resource Mapper to identify all sorts of corridors that are not only in our town, but connect to other towns. So I know, Simon, you and I have talked on other projects, but a lot of this infrastructure and work is already being done here in Pound Ridge. And it is related to the natural resource inventories that Hudsonia does, but it is even more specifically related to TNC's resiliency data that is captured in H2H GIS maps that this full group worked on. And then a lot of the other natural resource data sets that are in the Hudson Valley Resource Mapper. So this is a great initiative, and I know we've had conversations with Westchester Land Trust on this as well.
I don't mean to pick on or call out Pollinator Pathway again, but I hear, and when I read the pitch, I hear a sharing of process around, I see corridors. We see corridors, we're thinking pollinators and birds, but other wildlife certainly. Anyways, I see a sharing of, I'm lost at the word, but I guess process lessons in terms of starting something like this that they see. I also hear a vision from this group of it being bigger. Anyways, I just throw that out there.
Yeah, I mean, it's an obvious thing.
Bedford's map, by the way, I put the link into the chat.
It would also, it's an obvious connection with Pollinator Pathway because there are corridors already drawn out for so many towns. But I'd be really interested in getting more information. I put this in the chat, but how you got your ordinances to pass, and if you had pushback from homeowners that were along the way, or if they were on board, just more information about that process would be great.
Can I also add one thing, just as another example of this? Here in the river towns, we worked with the historic site manager for the old Croton Aqueduct, which runs from the Croton the Croton Reservoir, North Westchester down to Yonkers. And we have now put together a program allowing adjacent landowners to create pollinator gardens up and down the entire Croton Aqueduct. And just a good example of working with corridors like that and with the park system, the New York State Park System, to create mechanisms for folks to take advantage of that. And this is just something that's just begun, but we're hoping to create, as people walk up and down the aqueduct, it's a great pathway for people up and down the side of the river to see pollinator gardens and learn about them as they go up and down. So just another good way of working with your local government through that.
So that's that. Thank you, Chet. We're at time. So Simon, I'll ask you if you want, or if you hadn't already, throw your email in chat. Others, if you have other ideas, throw them in there now, or get in touch with Simon. But and hang with us. This last presentation is our pitch is going to be great, and I think applicable to the entire region. And so I want to turn it over to Julia Rogers and Paul Mailhut-Singer from the Housatonic Valley Association for their presentation.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Katie. And I think that this previous conversation ties so well into what we're thinking about. So it is very exciting to be coming after you all. So I wanted to start by introducing myself. My name is Julia Rogers, and I am a relatively new staff member at the Housatonic Valley Association. And together with my colleague, Paul, we're going to talk a little bit about Follow the Forest, which is a strategic conservation vision that has presented to H2H previously. Follow the Forest was part of the conservation strategies that were put together by H2H back in 2018. And y'all have been great as we've sort of launched this initiative and really thought about partnerships. But the concept really is to protect and connect forests from the southern Hudson Valley all the way through to Canada. As you can see on this map, the green blobs are core forests, and the orange that you can see sort of in the middle tier are wildlife linkages that we have put together. And so I'm going to zoom in a little bit to focus in on H2H's region. And the reason we really bring this to you all today is that the vision is only successful with the help of all of the local partners. And the H2H partners are really sort of that leading edge of this core forest that you just saw extending all the way to Canada. So as we think about sort of having this vision of wildlife being able to move, we need the local partners that are all within H2H to think about, you know, as that last presentation was talking about, that wildlife connectivity and these core forests that are the critical part of this linkage. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Paul so he can talk about some of the actions.
Yeah, thanks, Joya. So I'm Paul Singer. I'm also serving on the land team at HVA. I know we're on the clock, so I'll try to keep it snappy. For starters, we're just generally trying to ramp up engagement in 2022. We're looking forward to engaging the general public with Fall of the Forest, and we're also looking forward to working together with new and existing partners. And I just wanted to outline a few actionable steps our partners can take to get involved. So first off, we've developed a new exercise for assessing wildlife habitat linkages that we're excited to share with you. So as we think about connectivity, and you just saw the map, we're looking to assess linkages where wildlife gets funneled at pinch points between core forests. And these are areas that, if disturbed, can disproportionately affect wildlife movement. The exercise is a great way to engage volunteer groups and even high school students and get them thinking more critically about the importance of protecting a wildlife corridor. And we've tried to make this exercise easy to use and fun and accessible. And we're scoring linkages based on their viability, and crowdsourcing data on linkages will help our Fall of the Forest partners set conservation priorities that take habitat connectivity into account. So please get in touch with us if you'd like to schedule a field day. We'd love to do that. Or just if you have any questions about the exercise in general. And I think Joya is going to drop a link in the chat to the section of our website that outlines the exercise and has all the resources. More generally, we look forward to engaging with Fall of the Forest partners one-on-one so we can gain a sense of your conservation priorities and a better understanding of how those priorities might align with Fall of the Forest's vision of connected landscapes throughout the region. Yeah, and then Joy and I also wanted to direct you to the Green Print Pledge Fund, which some of you might have heard about before. And the Pledge Fund has historically encouraged donors who give to projects in Connecticut to also donate to land conservation projects in New York and Massachusetts. So that's a really nice source of funding that you might be able to tap into. And then lastly, I just wanted to talk about Fall of the Forest as an engagement and fundraising tool that really highlights the collaborative and interconnected nature of our conservation work. So to that end, we're currently creating shared resources that can be used by Fall of the Forest partners to engage their networks and galvanize greater support around projects. Example of that is our new film. And Joya is going to drop a link to the 1-minute sneak peek of our new video that's coming out tomorrow on Fall of the Forest's Facebook and Instagram pages. So we encourage you to check that out and follow us on social media. And yeah, more generally, we'd love to hear from you. We're really excited to work with you and work with active and engaged partners who are realizing the Fall of the Forest vision beyond the area that the Housatonic Valley Association covers. And in the meantime, we encourage you to visit the Fall of the Forest website to learn more and to check out our story map too. So that just about wraps it up.
You guys must have practiced as well. You're rock stars is exactly on 5 minutes. I am totally multitasking right now because my little one hasn't seen me all day, and I know we're at 5:30. But I'd love to hear reactions, thoughts from the audience, if you will, or questions.
And I'll just throw out there, we threw a lot of information at the very end of this meeting. So Paul and I will both put our emails in the chat, and I'm sure some of you might also know Tim and Connie, who also work on our team, and obviously they're also great people to reach out to. But feel free to email us, and we're always happy to talk more.
This sounds really exciting. I mean, it looks like it dovetails very well with the kind of things we were interested in. But you're obviously taking a much broader view than we were, where we're trying to link together municipalities. You're looking at whole regions. But I wasn't quite clear on exactly what sort of initiatives we might tap into specifically from that. I mean, you mentioned Greenpoint donation. I'm not sure I'm familiar with that, but also some sort of assessment process. In any case, I was wondering if you could elaborate just a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sort of first and foremost, you know, it's talking with different groups of people, sometimes framing it in sort of the larger sphere. So thinking about obviously your local work that's going on the ground is the critical piece of what we're trying to accomplish, but sometimes positioning that in the regional picture really speaks to some people. So I think, you know, there's that answer. And then I think, you know, thinking about what you're doing with the zoning ordinances, having some sort of assessment. So essentially the wildlife linkages that are saying, you know, where can wildlife cross roads or pinch points, and what does that look like? And so that might be able to tie really well. Obviously, you guys have had grants to have Hudsonia do that, but we've had a lot of success getting volunteers and high school students out on the ground and thinking about these sorts of things. So it might be something, whether it's a little bit more informal or just another piece to get engagement around what you're doing, that could be really useful. And then the Greenprint Partner Pledge Fund is really a source to help with land transactions. So less so on the, you know, like zoning enforcement side of things, and more so on the, you know, thinking about projects and what projects would further the follow the forest goal.
I had a question about the pinch points. Is that something that you've already assessed where they are, or is that something you're working with people to assess?
Yeah. Both. So we've drawn some blobs on maps. And you know, in say Northwestern Connecticut, we've been working a lot with the local land trust there to get them to say, you know, oh, we need this blob as well, and then to get volunteers on the ground to really assess them. But I would say, you know, as we think about sort of Westchester County and Southern Connecticut, we really need your knowledge to help say, here's where, you know, there's a good blob, and here's where the wildlife are crossing.
Because again, the pollinator pathway is in so many of those towns, and we have the town organizers' emails, and a lot of towns are, you know, they have to sit down and say, well, where do we want to focus our pathway? And knowing that it was pinch point might be a good reason to, you know, design the pathway that way. So that could just be a good way to coordinate, I think.
Yeah, I'd love to connect with you further on that.
Okay, cool.
I had also presented an idea when I followed up with Julia and Paul about something that's really under development right now, that H2H and or Follow the Forest may be interested in sort of being a case study for we're developing for the bird initiative, mapping products, tools for modeling for our other RCPs to use. Yeah, one second. I can't think. About using priority bird species to help identify core areas for protection that may or may not be protected, and climate strongholds. So it's something that's not quite done, but it was started by our previous GIS intern. Love to share more when we have a little bit more to share, but I think it feels like a fit here in terms of talking about wildlife corridors and connections, and keeping core forests as core forests.
Yeah, if I can just add to that really quickly, like we've conducted like a full volunteer day before in Woodbury, and that was like really successful, and we got different groups of volunteers out assessing, you know, 2 linkages or so, and then we came back together, and that actually helped us really improve the exercise. So we are at the stage now where we feel confident in the linkage assessment exercise's ability to actually test the viability of linkages. And so we're really looking forward to working with partner land trusts on this. And it's been really fun doing. And also we've had success with high schools as well. Like seems like, you know, environmental science students are really interested in doing this, and it's a fun exercise for them too.
I definitely want to recognize that we're a little bit over on time and want to respect anyone who has to go, obviously. Paul and Julie, I did see another question pop up. And if there are others, or if folks have other questions and want to stick around. But for those who have to boogie, I totally get it. I got a hungry toddler. But thank you. This was really great, really inspiring. I can't wait to get together in person. And again, I'll be posting all of the different events. They're not already, I think they are on our website, and be hearing from me via the listserv. But thanks for coming tonight. Stay warm, stay healthy, and see you more in 2022. And thanks for all the folks that pitched. And again, Julia and Paul, there is one other question: how are potential linkages identified? Andrew.
I can answer that. So in most cases, they're identified using GIS satellite imagery, I believe. So which means that they're by no means comprehensive. And that's why, like, the piece that's really important is actually working with people who have a local understanding of where we are and who can look at a map and say, you know, this is a potential linkage right here that we hadn't considered before. So especially in your H2H region, like, we're looking to place a lot more blobs, as Julia was saying, all over that map. Yeah.
That's great. Awesome. Well, thanks everybody. I mean, closing thoughts or I don't know, inspirations. I hope you get to do all the fun things you like to do. Seemed like hiking was a top one for those early on in the meeting. Got to fill out our poll. All the fun winter things that you like to do. And we'll be seeing each other again very soon. Glad for all these new connections.
Thanks, Katie.
Take care.